Well, hello again, everyone. How's it going today? My name's Carpo, and I'm going to start off this video by making a bold statement. It's right here. You don't have to read music to be a great musician. Nor do you need any formal lessons or an expensive guitar. Usually. And I'll explain exactly what I mean here. Usually in the sense that, well, you never need an expensive guitar. Don't tell musicians that. Musicians will scare other people away from wanting to be musicians with their extreme passion for their instruments sometimes. To the idea of you paid how much, jaw drops to the floor. So I'm going to start off with where this video is going to touch on, so you can decide whether you even want to listen to it or not. But first off, I wanted to discuss whether anyone can learn guitar. There's a question that's often asked, can anybody learn to play guitar? And when I looked it up, almost every site that talks about it discusses playing guitar as if you've just got to keep trying. Then you'll find these blogs with kids who are saying, man, I've just been, quote, trying for 2 or 3 years every day and I can still barely play a few chords. I horribly suck. And people will just say, keep trying, you can do it. The thing I'd like to point out is that there are many different conditions that parts of the population have which make it difficult for them to play guitar or any instrument. One of them is called amusia. Amusia is a condition in which a person's perception of tone is incorrect. It makes it very difficult them to determine the proper pitch. Now, there's also a form of neuropathy, which I've heard several different conditions. Some are congenital. People can be born with them or they can have an accident. But there are people who are tone deaf and horrible at matching pitch. We know this. This makes it very difficult to play guitar or piano or anything for that matter when you're doing experimental. Now, these are the kind of people who can get formal lessons and then at least they know what they're playing. But then there's a difference between the technical and the feel. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. When I was younger, I started playing guitar at about 15 years old. The reason I started playing guitar was, well, let's just say I wanted to play guitar. My younger brother was, I think, 9 or 10. And I was like 13 or 14. And he got his first guitar. It was one of those cheesy little electric guitars with the speaker in the body. And my brother now is a phenomenal guitarist. We're in our 40s now. So he's been playing consistently. I really hadn't. I left guitar when I was young not because I didn't feel like I was talented enough or that I could learn, but I thought my fingers were too big because I'm a big person. And that kind of scared me off. And I realized how difficult it is to get my fingers close enough to play the chords. It would sound muffled. So, for example, it wasn't until I was 18 that I really bought my first decent guitar. This is it. It was my acoustic guitar. I've had it for 27 years or something. And it still sounds wonderful. I love this guitar. And this bass behind me, which I picked up when I was playing in a band with my brother, it's just a Spectre. It's a very simple bass. It was a few $100s. And it was like, the first bass that I ever actually bought. But to back up for a moment, when I decided I couldn't play guitar, I said, well, I can play bass because the strings are bigger. Of course. That'll make it easier. And the fact that nobody else played bass meant that I could play with all those millions of guitarists out there who did. So I joined a little band with my friends when we were in junior high. And maybe we were freshmen, I think. And we would play at the junior high music, area where they'd let us use their thing for practice. I never took any formal lessons. I never learned, I may have taken 2 by our friend, my friend Andreas's dad. I think it was Jorge Espinoza. Phenomenal guitarist and bass player. Just got bored with lessons. It wasn't for me. Had no interest in learning sheet music. I had no interest in learning how to play the way other people wanted to play. And this doesn't necessarily work for everyone to learn on your own. But I think a lot of purists will say, well, you have to learn music theory. And anyone says you need to know music theory or learn to read music to be a real musician, they've just got, their nose up in the air. There's so much arrogance in music, but it's not all like that. But when I was younger, I realized I could tune by ear. And by just listening to the string, and I'd be like, okay, let's see if I can hear each, string. So I'd be like, so once you learn that pitch, you're like, that one's a little out of tune. Or maybe I am. Anyway, it took me a long time to realize that I had that skill. And I always thought of myself as not a very good guitar player. But the thing is, I learned by practicing. And the songs that I learned, and here's the funny thing, I didn't pick up a pick, even learn to play with the pick at all for at least 2 or 3 years after I started. And I started using that muffle and that tap, just using my own styles. But then I started learning finger picking because I loved Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. So yeah. And then of course the old, Stairway to Heaven, all that shit. That is what built up my ability to just play whatever. So I'm giving you my backstory to just explain kind of where I'm coming from as a musician. This came up after I was talking to my brother the other day, and he was saying that he loved my bass lines because I played bass in a band with him. It was called First in Line, and one of my subscribers who's been here for a while has probably seen the video from Time to Spare, which was our band we had before. We were called Related Material, then we changed it to Time to Spare, but we had 2 albums that we recorded. They're pretty good quality, decent, and I still love the music on them. The thing was, there were no expectations. It was 3 of us. We went into a band room. We went through a few different drummers, but it was my brother and I as him on lead guitar and vocals, and I played bass. And we had Sam as our drummer in the end, who played a Moog synthesizer. And I sing up backup vocals rarely, once in a while, but we did a radio show on the local KPSU College Radio. I mean, we had a great time, and it was fun. It was enjoyable. But once music becomes a business, this is where a lot of people, I feel, you start to take it too seriously. And I know that sounds ridiculous because you have to take your business seriously. But I won't get into that, I guess, that aspect of the money in it. But my point was that I wanted to just do it for the pleasure. Sometimes you're motivated, sometimes you aren't. It's like an art form. Some people have to struggle a lot harder to learn these things. And I commend those who stick to it. I feel almost like a lot of people who it comes natural to don't take full advantage of it. Like I tend to have many different hobbies and interests. If I put as much time into guitar and bass as I do into other things, would I be better? Or would I end up playing and learning so much that I end up getting stuck in a structure? And this brings me to my point about learning and taking lessons. It develops a structure. And if you look back on it and you listen, you think historically. Think, well, who the hell decided this is how to play guitar, right? I mean, there are basic structures. Learning scales, learning chords. I still don't know my scales, but I know the scales are built on the chords. I know how to play chords and how to transpose them. And I think that those are some of the basic skills a guitarist wants to learn, like being able to play a note. You've got so many different options on the neck for different types of chords, different minors. And once it starts to click, it comes naturally. It's just an amazing feeling when all of a sudden you're like, oh, I didn't even realize that. Oh, okay. But at a certain point, you've learned everything you can. And this is when, and not everything, but what I mean is once you've learned all the basic chords and scales, people want to expand. This is when they get into music theory. This is when people often want to do down tuning or alternate tuning, where you can tune your strings all different types of ways. I did it when I was playing slide guitar because you want to tune down your high E. You've got a drop B or D. You've got a low B on a bass. You've got so many different options. I love the low notes. I'm a sucker for bass. So yeah, I totally love that kind of stuff. But overcomplicating music, I think, takes away from the feeling. We all know that some of the most simple songs are the best. In fact, I wrote a song when I was 15, and all my friends liked it a lot. It was like the best song that I'd written that people had responded to. I've recorded it. It's on here. It's called Bottle of Air, but stupid title. I didn't really care for the lyrics anymore. It was 30 years ago. But it was just an E minor and I think a D. That's it. It was a 2-chord song all the way through. There was one part where it adds another chord for a second, but the simplest song is often like the one that I like the most, one other people like the most. Why is that? Why is simplicity such an awesome thing? But on top of that, why do so many musicians overcomplicate and fill things in? Like my oldest son, he's 26. He bought me an acoustic for my birthday a couple of years ago. It's a 12-string, actually. So he's a musician, and we got him a drum set when he was young. Then he wanted to play guitar. He started playing guitar. He was playing AC/DC for years. He grew, and now he's into the Grateful Dead, and he plays the Grateful Dead with his bandmates, and they have a cover band. And we were talking about that, and we were talking about how people overcomplicate music, and it comes down to being in the pocket, which brings me to what I was talking with my brother the other day. He said that he liked my bass playing because I could play in the pocket. And for those who don't know, it's basically following the downbeat, but also being able to do like half steps, experiment, go up the fretboard, do what you want to do. And as a bassist, bassists often learn to just hold the train, hold the beat, follow the beat and just keep it basic. And that works great for, most music, but sometimes bassists like myself who haven't had formal lessons just don't care what the rules tend to follow, and I just kind of play whatever I want. I do all kinds of weird slides and stuff. I'm not good at it. I'm not a great bass player. Don't get me wrong. In my mind, I suck at bass, which was what surprised me when my brother said, "Oh, your bass rocks." It still surprises me. My brother is a phenomenal musician, thinks that my bass is great. I never really practiced much, except for when we were in the band. It's kind of like I said, maybe it just comes natural and I'm not giving it enough credit. But when I was saying that about music being overcomplicated, there are a lot of people out there who, there's the Les Claypools and the Joe Satrianis of the world, right? Les Claypool's a wonderful, phenomenal bassist. I love Primus. Primus sucks, as they say. Then there's also like the Joe Satriani. He just played the craziest solo stuff. But for most people, when things are overcomplicated, they get too boring. Les Claypool can do it because the bass is the focus of the music. But I get overwhelmed when music is too chaotic. And there was something that I once heard. It's not the music that moves you, it's the space between the beats. And so you don't have to be good to be famous or be a great musician. You just have to have inspiration and want to play something. It doesn't have to be complicated. A lot of bands and these so-called landmark albums were people who, their very first album was them fresh out of high school. They'd never even hardly played guitar or instruments at all. They knew nothing about music theory. They just played music, and now people love it. Why? Because it was honest and true. Because they were doing it for the right reasons. Sometimes following albums can be better, but sometimes that first album is something to really behold. So if it's too busy, it can sound horrible. And that's in my opinion. The brain just gets too confused with all the different instruments. And now I get into, just to kind of point this out, most musicians become multi-instrument people. They want to play different things. I branched out from bass and guitar. I'm trying to learn keyboard right now. I don't know much. I can play a basic beat on a drum set, but I'm not a drummer by any means. But the gear fanatics out there, it's interesting to me. And the reason I'm going to point this out is because when you watch videos from musicians, they sit there with their, $10,000 guitar talking about how wonderful this, $8,000 amplifier is, and you're like, okay, most people can't afford that, obviously. Even if you're a good musician, it seems that musicians tend to say, oh, I've earned this, which is fine. If a person wants to buy a really nice guitar, that's great. But, it gets into discussions about, look at this rosewood fretboard and this special string sauce and the line of pedals and effects all the way across the stage, right? You've got your gold cables, and I'm being sarcastic here, not gold cables, but, special picks, ebony inlays, all these amazing things. To have one special guitar, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think when people have 10 acoustics and 20 electrics and 30 amps, it gets a little bit ridiculous. I've always been a modest musician when I did play. The only bass I've ever bought, like I said, was that one for a few $100. And I bought a secondhand Peavey head for $75 on Craigslist, and a 410 cab from Eagle Works in Portland using Ampeg 10s. Phenomenal cab, works just fine. Not the greatest bass, but it works. And I get it if your life depends on it, you're a professional. But the point I'm making here is not that the gear is the issue. It's that musicians are chasing a sound. They're chasing a feeling. I hate to compare it to drugs, but music can be a lot like that. And people don't even realize it. They say, why can't I get this tone I want? Not realizing that just the shape of your ears alone will change the tone. You put a pair of sunglasses on, it changes your ears a little bit. The tone from your whole board could change, or you might have stuffy head that day and not even realize it. Or perhaps it depends on what angle you are at the amplifier, the speaker. Like, I'm actually working on a design right now for an amp with, like rabbited joints and everything, a really nice speaker box for my brother, because he wanted me to make him one. And all this music stuff came up at once. I had a garage sale, and a guy was talking about how I should build the boxes for vintage stereos because they get damaged, and I'm a carpenter, so it's something I'd been considering. And then my brother called me up and asked me if I'd basically make him an amp, and or rather a speaker box, just something to hold a 12. And I realized that musicians will pay ridiculous amounts for these things, therefore people will charge ridiculous amounts for them. I mean, if you look up some of these custom-made cabinets online, they're ridiculously overpriced. But when it comes down to custom hardware, sometimes that's what people want. So I actually might start making amp cabinets. So if any of my subscribers play music and you're interested, I want to make affordable, high-quality cabinets constructed out of solid wood. There's something to be noted here. If you're making a speaker box out of MDF, which is medium density fiberboard, or versus pine versus oak, they all have different tones and sounds. And also depending on whether you put Tolex over it, which is the plastic you see over amplifier boxes. There's a lot in the music world to know. And that doesn't even include the different amps and how everybody wants to have these beautiful rows of tubes. It really does come down to kind of a fashion show in the music industry a lot of the time. And, I know some musicians might take offense to that, but I doubt it. It's very similar in the music world of, I collect amplifiers, old stereos, things like that. Old Pioneer and Marantz, whatever I can find, and old speakers. And having my garage sale, I talked to a couple other guys, and we were talking about the, like I mentioned, the old gold cable fanatics, the idea that everything is better if it costs more, and discussing things like speaker cables and how you don't need too thick of a gauge, you just need something that works, and how ridiculous people are, because there's snake oil salesmen on every corner who want to sell you on something better, something greater, when often that's not the case. When you can buy a $20,000 acoustic guitar, or you can go out in 1998 and buy one for $150 that sounds great. And like I said, learning to play with the pick is important, and I waited too long for that, so I've always loved G and C. That's transposing, as I was mentioning earlier. I feel like I'm talking to musicians at the same time as non-musicians. So I'm pointing out things that people already know, but I'm definitely not here to teach guitar lessons, but I just wanted to give you an idea of... And sometimes when you play chords on old guitars, You know, the neck bows, you get buzz, all kinds of problems where it just doesn't sound right on a certain chord. Your intonation gets off. This is a Washburn. Oscar Schmidt was the kind of side brand by Washburn. $150 new at Tigard Music when I just got out of high school. And, you know, I guess the point being that it's really about the music. It's not about how many lessons you've had. It's not about how good you are at reading music. These things can actually help and benefit you, especially if you play, say, with an orchestra or you're a professional musician. It's going to be different requirements than being a person who just wants to learn to play guitar. I would urge anybody out there who wants to learn to just remember some basic rules. Don't let anybody tell you you're doing something wrong. Obviously, you can play a chord wrong, but some people hold their pencils different. Some people have different methods of doing things that work equally. It's like typing. I took typing class, but I don't follow the right fingers the way I should. Doesn't matter. It's the way I've learned and it works for me. You might find that has advantages down the road. But learning basic structure of chords obviously is important. But I firmly believe that if you just go by feel and you play it for the music and you're not chasing tone all the time, you'll be chasing music instead. Writing your own music is important. I started out by learning other people's songs, but I very quickly learned that the most important fact to me for music was learning to write my own songs and learning to play and sing at the same time. And so I urge anyone who's starting out to really take that as a first step, because playing other people's music is one thing, but writing activates a different part of the brain. So, turned into a longer video than I anticipated, but I am a music lover, so I could go on about it. I'll talk to you all next time. Thanks for listening to me ramble. And if you have any thoughts on any of this shit, just leave it on down below, and I'll talk to you next time.